Well, thank you. Hey, don't touch each other. You're not married yet. Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? A couple of weeks ago, I showed you guys how to do a carving pattern much like this one here. This displayed the simple usage of just a little line and a couple of chunks of clay that you take out with a basic trim tool. This is probably one of the easiest patterns that you can do in ceramic artwork when you first start out carving. But today we're going to be moving on to something a little bit more complicated in that we're going to start learning patternized carving. I mean, technically speaking, this is still a pattern, but I feel like you get what I mean when I say pattern. This is clearly more of a pattern. Patternized carving is one of the easier techniques when it comes to carving inside of your leather soft or leather hard work. Stuff like this, and even larger projects like this teapot that I made here, like this, can be made very interesting with texture as long as you just understand how to follow a certain pattern. So today, in part number 2 of our carving series, I'm going to show you guys how to make this specific pattern. Okay, but not on this one because I already did it on this one. We're probably going to need something a little bit more leather soft, so... yes, the YouTube movie magic. I would like more cups, please, to do this on. Editor, please. Yes, the YouTube power. For this technique, you're going to need 2 primary things. You're going to need a form inside of its leather to leather soft phases. If you go anywhere above the leather phases, you start moving into the leather hard and bone dry phases of ceramic artwork. This is artwork that you can no longer really etch into in this fashion. You can't really do this to it. It becomes a lot harder and you might make little clay silica dust everywhere, and that's not good for your lungs. So much like our previous carving video, I heavily suggest you make this while it's in the leather soft or leather phases. The second thing that you're going to need for this specific technique is a trim tool. Now, I'm using the pear trim tool because it's fairly easy to get, and half the time it comes inside of your package of beginner trim tools in the first place. When you buy a beginner package of pottery tools, you're either going to get this tool or you're going to get this tool right here. Either way, it doesn't matter because we're going to be using the end, that little loopy side right here, of both trim tools. And both of the trim tools basically have this shape on the end of them, so either one you want to use is fine. Patternized carving is extremely simple, and it only requires that you make one little edge into your pottery, and then after that you repeat that same pattern over and over again. And it'll start to look weird at first, don't get me wrong, it looks really weird, it looks like you're just messing up your pottery. But over time, it'll start to look a little bit more like this. This, of course, started out as one line, and that's just kind of how it goes. It looks gross at first. Now there's 2 main ways that I enjoy approaching this technique. Number 1, I like to start from the bottom and go upwards and stop somewhere right in the middle here, or I like to go from the top and go downwards, and stop, of course, somewhere right in the middle here. This is solely because while doing patternized carving, I almost never go all the way down the body. This is only because if you did this, you would just have lines all the way down the body, and it would look fine, don't get me wrong, it would look okay, but you would have a very one-dimensional piece when it comes to carving. Instead, what I usually do is I make a line halfway down the body, I make another line halfway down the body, and I'll give it a little bit of texture somewhere in the middle. This gives it a much better look rather than just, you know what, I'm gonna show. Okay, that actually looks pretty cool. I was wrong. This is what it looks like when you do patternized carving with one singular line going down the entire body of the clay over and over again in close proximity to each other. This looks pretty neat, actually. Now, there's a couple different ways to do this technique. Number 1, you can do patternized carving with one very simple line all the way down the clay body. This makes a fairly good texture, and it looks really nice whenever you start to glaze it. You can do a technique where you make 2 lines, where you make one up here and one down here. You can do it this way, where you start at the top and the bottom, one line here, and you carve out some of the clay in the middle that would have made a popping out texture. That way, this texture inverts just a tiny bit. This is technically with 3 lines, 1, 2, and 3. And then you can go for the big show, where you just have patterns going all the way up and down the body with multiple lines. We got one here, one here, one here, one here, we got like 17 right here. They are all done with a very simple usage of your pear trim tool or your loop tool. The only difference is that I put more lines in every single pattern. But each and every one of these, I do basically just follow a pattern of taking my clay trim tool and carving straight up and down from the body. That's it. This is a multifaceted technique in that you can basically make 4 different types of textures with one simple line. This type of simple pattern is achieved by doing this one line over and over again in close proximity to one another. All you really have to do is take a line, stroke it down. Take a line, stroke it down. Take a line, stroke it down. Let's try to do this one with 2 lines. Take your trim tool and either start at the top or the bottom, it really doesn't matter, whichever you're comfortable with, and just go halfway down the body. Before we get started, Potter tip! Some of you might be concerned with how smooth your cups are, and I totally get it. Moving on to the intermediate section, you might not get product this smooth or even this smooth. I've learned over time how to throw fairly smooth. But I think this is a good technique for those of you who don't even like making smoother stuff, because all your carving is basically going to erase all these little lines and all these little clay bugs and clay boogers that you see in the clay body right now. This line right here was made kind of on purpose to show you this. When I end up glazing this is absolutely going to be showing in my final product. But instead of trying desperately to erase this and putting it back on the wheel and make super smooth product, much like this, I could just very easily put this texture that I'm about to put in it, and it'll just erase all of it. Start by getting the small loop of your carve tool and starting all the way at the top of your clay body. Put a little bit of pressure, kind of like you're digging into the clay. Look, this is about how much pressure you're going to need. Keep this pressure on your pottery and just drag it into the clay body. Stop about halfway down the clay body and pull off just a little bit. Now we're just going to keep on making these half lines all the way around the clay body. Okay, we got about half of the carving done. I know right now it looks a little bit strange, but don't worry, it'll get better in a second. Now we're gonna skip a little bit of clay in this middle ring here and start from the middle and go all the way down the clay body. This part's a little bit easier because you can technically go right off of the clay body at the bottom here. I know I have a very angled bottom, but you can very easily just go right off of that bottom and it'll still look like it's part of the cup. Don't hesitate and think that you must stop directly at the bottom. Just let it go right off the foot. This is going to look really good when we glaze it because some glazes like to kind of coat the inside with one-dimensional glazes, but on the outside, if you put a texture, it'll become blue in some spots, and like my floating blue becomes blue whenever it goes on the inside of some texture, but it becomes kind of tannish or tannish blue whenever you put it on something like a flat surface, much like this. Don't forget to get a little wet sponge and just kind of wipe down these little clay boogers and textures that you see here. It's very, very easy to make these smoothed out once you're done carving into them. See? Looks a lot better now. Okay, so I've shown you what one pattern does with just one simple carve line all the way around the cup does, and I've shown you what 2 lines all the way around the cup does. These are drastically different patterns, but you're basically using the same technique to do both of them. The only difference is instead of one long line, you made a couple of lines, one at the top, one at the bottom, and these are both massively different. But what happens when we do 3 lines? I mean, is there even any space left to carve? Well, yeah, there is. Let me show you. Let's start off the way we did before by making one line from the top to the middle and from the middle to the bottom. That should be easy. Potter tip! Some of you may have already noticed, but when I start carving, I put my finger the closest to the carved part, making contact with the cup as I can, while I'm posting some fingers right up here. This is solely for stability. When I first began, taking the trim tool and just kind of like doing this wasn't all that great because my hand would be a little bit shaky. But doing this helps me stabilize a little bit more, and it helps me keep that consistent pressure. I can technically now just kind of do this because I know the pressure, but if you're a beginner and you're not too good at carving yet, I heavily suggest you kind of anchor your hand down on whatever you're carving and put your finger as close as you can to the contact point of your trim tool and the clay. This should give you a lot more stability and pressure if you're having trouble with that facet of the work. It's kind of the same pressure when you're writing with a pen or a pencil. It's exactly like that. A little tip here, try not to make the line exactly below where you made your first line up here. If I were to get a line right here and just make it go straight down, it's gonna look like I carved something, I skipped a little spot, and then I kept going. Try and get in the middle spaces, so something right here, something right here. But if you make it exactly, like if you're really good with your hand control, and you make it exactly where the previous line was, it's gonna kind of look like you just skipped out on one big long line. You don't want that. I say, as I probably am not going to do that. This looks pretty good as it is. But you guys remember how I told you that we're starting from the top, going to the middle, skipping a little bit, and going directly down the middle? Well, all of the clay now is in the middle right here. This texture that you're seeing is really just the leftover clay from not carving. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna carve it. For this section, I like to use the bigger part of my trim tool. If you have the loop tool, it's okay, you can still do this. But if you're using a pear trim tool, much like I am, it's a lot easier to just take your thumb, hold it, and kind of flick off this clay right in the middle, which is what we're gonna be doing. This is one of my favorite parts because this requires almost no attention span or any real pressure. You don't have to anchor your hand down, you don't have to put your finger close to the contact point and pull it downwards and be nice and serene. You can pretty much just flick, 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 and just keep going down the clay body on all the spots in which you haven't already carved. That doesn't look too bad. You can technically do a little bit more carving if you felt like it. You can get your trim tool and do the same thing that we did down here by flicking off little bits of clay up here. You can do it down here. You can do it anywhere you want. The point is to have fun and really just keep carving until your heart's content. Be careful, because if your product is not thick enough or you carve too much, you will carve through the body. So there is definitely a certain point where you should stop. But the real point of this video was to show you how you can get 3 different textures from one carving technique by putting them all in different patterns. This is 1 line, here's 2 lines, and here's 3 lines. This is probably one of the easier techniques when it comes to carving inside of your ceramic artwork, and you don't really need any carving skill. I know a lot of people get intimidated with carving because they think that they should be some master craftsman or some master draw artwork person that knows how to draw everything before they even get to this stage, but that's not true. You can very easily just get the basic tools that you got out of your beginner package and just start carving away. Before you put these on the shelves, make sure to take a damp sponge and just kind of clean off these little bits of textures that are left. The high majority of things that you carve are gonna have these leftover little tiny bits of clay, and sometimes they stay on the clay body, sometimes they get inside the cup, and sometimes they, just fly off onto the cat.
Meow.
But always make sure to smooth out anything that you end up carving after you're done. Well, thank you. Hey, don't touch each other. You're not married yet. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. I really just wanted to show you guys how one simple little line and one tool that really isn't even meant for carving can make all the difference in your artwork when you start carving and making textures on your stuff. There's also multiple different ways you can use this technique to make your work a little bit more interesting. And I feel like I keep on saying this, but this tool is not meant for carving, and we just did 3 different patterns of carving with the same technique on our stuff. So you don't have to go out and buy yourself a whole brand new kit of carving tools. You can do a lot with just this simple little tool. If you guys would like to see any of my actual artwork, the links are always down below for your beautiful potter eyes to see. The Instagrams, the Facebooks, how much I weigh. I'm a fatty. Hopefully, especially for some of you beginner potters who have just learned to make a cylinder by itself, this will help your work be a little bit more interesting. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week. Okay, you see? See, this is what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I'm talking about. After you're done carving, look, is it? Yup, it's always gonna be in there. How about you? You got some too? You little thief.